My name is Clara Vance. I'm 31 years old, and for 5 years, my husband treated my family's legacy like his personal bank account while treating me like an unpaid farmhand. I kept telling myself he just didn't understand what this land meant to me. But the moment that finally made the truth impossible to ignore came last Thanksgiving. With the dinner still sitting untouched on the stove, he zipped his duffel bag, looked at me, and announced he was divorcing me and taking half of my ancestral farm. "The law is on my side," he smirked. "Enjoy the trailer park." 12 family members went dead silent. My aunt dropped her wine glass right onto the hardwood floor. I spent $112,500 restoring those 84 acres alone. I fixed the fences. I bled into that dirt. He just posed for photos on the porch. I thought my loyalty would eventually mean something to him. I was wrong. But he had no idea what I was about to toss onto the kitchen counter. He thought he had already won, blissfully unaware of the little silver flash drive holding 14 messages between him and my own cousin. What happened next didn't just obliterate his entire legal case. It was about to permanently destroy his reputation and split the room in half. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now let me take you back to 3 years ago, the day the renovations started. The restoration of the Vance family farm wasn't a hobby. It was a rescue mission. When my grandfather passed away, these 84 acres were screaming for help. The barn roof was sagging like a tired old horse, and the perimeter fences had rotted into the tall grass, leaving the land open and defenseless. I put every cent of my savings into it, $112,500 to be exact, but I also put in the kind of work you can't invoice. I remember one Saturday in mid-July. The humidity in Ohio that year felt like walking through a warm pond. I was out by the south pasture, wrestling with a post-hole digger. My shoulders were screaming, and my jeans were caked in a mixture of red clay and sweat that never quite washes out. Every time I hit a rock, the vibration rattled my teeth. I had 20 more posts to set before sundown if I wanted the north boundary to hold. While I was out there, I looked back toward the farmhouse. Ian was on the wraparound porch. He looked like he'd stepped out of a catalog for refined country living. He was wearing a crisp white linen shirt and holding a glass of iced tea that I'd made that morning. He wasn't looking at the sagging barn or the cracked driveway. He was holding his phone up, tilting it just right to catch the golden hour light hitting the fields I'd just mowed. I watched him take a burst of photos. Later that night, I saw the post. He decaptioned it. "Nothing beats the piece of the land we're building together. Hard work pays off." He didn't mention that he hadn't touched a shovel in 3 years. He didn't mention that the "we" in his caption was actually just my bank account and my lower back. I came inside that evening, leaving my muddy boots on the mat, and Ian didn't even look up from his tablet. He just pointed at a smudge on the floor. "Careful, Clara," he said, his voice smooth and untroubled. "We just got those floors refinished. Let's try to keep the place looking nice." I paid for those floors. I'd spent 6 weeks of my life sanding them until my lungs felt like they were full of sawdust. I just nodded and went to the shower. I was too tired to argue. A few weeks later, my cousin Maya started showing up more often. Maya and I grew up together, but we were built differently. She liked things that were shiny and new. I liked things that lasted. She'd pull her convertible into the gravel drive, wearing sundresses that cost more than my monthly feed bill, and head straight for the porch. One afternoon, I was hauling rolls of heavy-duty fencing wire from the back of my truck. Each roll weighed about 80 pounds. I was struggling with the tailgate when Maya and Ian walked out of the house. They were laughing about something. Clara, you look like a coal miner, Maya chirped, shielding her eyes from the sun. She sat down in one of the wicker chairs I'd restored. Doesn't she look exhausted, Ian? You really should make her take a break. It's not healthy to be this obsessed with dirt. Ian leaned against the porch railing right next to her. He didn't offer to help me with the wire. He just watched me struggle with a look of mild pity. I try, Maya, he said, sighing. But you know Clara. She's got this martyr complex about the farm. She thinks if she isn't bleeding, she isn't working. Maya giggled and took a long sip of her lemonade. Well, at least someone is keeping the aesthetics up, she said, looking at Ian. You've done such a great job with the landscaping, Ian. The curb appeal is finally coming around. Ian hadn't planted a single flower. He'd watched me plant the hydrangeas from the comfort of the air-conditioned living room, but he didn't correct her. He just smiled and took the compliment like it belonged to him. That was the pattern. I was the engine, and they were the passengers. I spent my autumns clearing brush and my winters fixing the heater in the pump house. I grew used to the calluses on my palms and the permanent ache in my neck. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that Ian was just a big-picture guy and that his support was emotional, even if it wasn't physical. I wanted to believe that the man I married valued the legacy I was protecting. By the time the major restorations were finished, the farm looked incredible. The 84 acres were fully enclosed by the new, sturdy black fences I'd spent months installing. The barn was painted, the soil was turned, and the property value had nearly doubled because of the sweat equity I'd poured into every square inch. I stood at the edge of the driveway on a cool October evening, looking at the finished work. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I thought the hard part was over. I thought I'd finally built a fortress that would keep my family safe. I didn't realize that the person I was trying to build a future with was already looking for the exit. And he wasn't planning on leaving empty-handed. That was the first time I noticed he stopped asking when the next project would start. He stopped complaining about the dust. He became strangely agreeable, almost cheerful. It was the kind of quiet that happens right before a storm breaks. The fences were finally up. The boundaries were set. But as I looked at the house, I realized the biggest threat wasn't something I could keep out with wire and wood. It was already sitting in my living room, checking its reflection in the mirror. The first time I realized my marriage had a price tag was a Tuesday in early November. The air had turned sharp, and the last of the maples were dropping their leaves across the 84 acres. I was in the mudroom, peeling off my coveralls, when I heard Ian's voice coming from the kitchen. It was that specific tone he used when he was trying to sell something, high-pitched, breathless, and overly rehearsed. I walked in to find him sitting at the farm table with a stack of papers and a new leather briefcase. He wasn't alone. He had a laptop open, and he was showing something to two men I'd never seen before. They looked like city types, expensive puffer vests, polished boots that had never seen a day of actual work, and car keys on the table that belonged to German SUVs. And here, Ian said, pointing at the screen, is the North Pasture. We're thinking a boutique vineyard or maybe a high-end glamping retreat. The drainage is perfect, and the perimeter is already fully secured with brand-new fencing. I stood in the doorway, my hands still stained with the grease from the tractor I'd been servicing. Ian! He jumped slightly, then smoothed his hair. Clara, perfect timing. These are the guys from the development group I mentioned. I'm just giving them a virtual tour of the assets. Assets? I walked over to the table. This is a family farm, Ian, not a development project. And who said anything about glamping? Ian laughed, a dry, nervous sound. He looked at the two men and shook his head. She's a traditionalist, loves the dirt, you'll have to excuse her. He turned back to me, his eyes hard and cold despite the smile. Honey, we're just exploring options. Why don't you go get cleaned up? We're busy." The men didn't even look at me. I was just the help who had walked into the boardroom. I went to the sink to wash my hands, listening to Ian talk about our investment and our vision for the future of the Vance property. He was talking about my grandfather's land like it was a blank canvas he'd bought at an auction. After the men left, the silence in the house felt heavy. Ian was humming to himself, packing his laptop into that expensive leather bag. "Who were they, Ian?" I asked. I didn't raise my voice. I was too tired for a fight. "Investors, Clara, serious ones." He snapped the briefcase shut. "Look, we need to talk about the deed. This farm is worth 3 times what it was when we moved in. That's mostly thanks to the brand management I've been doing online. But legally, everything is still in your name. It's making the bank nervous. It's making the investors nervous." "The bank isn't involved in this farm," I said, "and neither are investors. I paid for the restoration with my inheritance and my own salary. There is no debt." Ian stepped closer. He smelled like expensive cologne and the sandalwood candles Maya had brought over last week. "That not the point. We're a team, a partnership, but right now on paper I'm just a tenant. If we want to take this to the next level, I need to be on the title. It's for tax purposes, really. It protects us both." "No," I said. The cheerfulness vanished instantly. His face tightened into a mask of pure resentment. "Excuse me." "The answer is no, Ian. This land has been in the Vance family for 4 generations. It stays in the Vance name. You knew that when we got married." "I've spent 3 years of my life here," he shouted. The sudden volume made me flinch. "I've built a brand around this place. I've brought in the eyes. I've made this property relevant again. And you're going to sit there and tell me I don't deserve a stake in it, after everything I've sacrificed?" I looked at his hands. They were soft. No scars, no calluses, no dirt under the nails. "What exactly have you sacrificed, Ian? The $112,500 was mine. The labor was mine. You've taken pictures." "You are so small-minded," he hissed. "You'd rather rot in the mud than build something that actually makes money. You're holding us back." He stormed out of the kitchen and slammed the door to the guest room. For the next week, the house was a tomb. He didn't speak to me. He didn't eat the dinner I cooked. He'd walk past me in the hallway like I was a ghost. The damage was real now. The farm, which had always been my sanctuary, felt like a cage. I found myself staying outside longer, even when the temperature dropped below freezing, just so I wouldn't have to be in the same room as his silence. But then, just as suddenly as the Cold War started, it ended. On the 8th day, I came in from the barn to find Ian in the kitchen, making coffee. He was whistling. When he saw me, he smiled, a bright, wide, genuine smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Hey, Clara," he said, handing me a mug. "Look, I'm sorry about last week. I was stressed. The investors were putting pressure on me and I took it out on you. You're right, this is your family's land. I shouldn't have pushed." I stared at him. "You're okay with it?" "Totally," he said, leaning against the counter. "I was being selfish. I realize now that my place is just being here to support you. Let's just forget the deed stuff. I want us to have a great Thanksgiving. The whole family is coming, right? Let's make it special." He reached out and squeezed my shoulder. It was supposed to be a comforting gesture, but his hand felt like lead. "I'm going to go help Maya with the decorations she bought," he added, checking his watch. "She's got some ideas for the porch. We'll be back in a few hours." I watched him walk out to his truck. He was wearing a new jacket. He looked lighter, like a man who had just solved a very difficult puzzle. That was the moment I knew. I didn't have proof yet, but I knew. Ian hadn't given up on the farm. He just stopped asking for my permission to take it. He was done negotiating. He had moved on to a different strategy, one that didn't require me to say yes. I stood in my kitchen, holding the coffee he'd made, and realized that my husband was no longer my partner. He was an occupant. And he was waiting for something. I looked out the window at the fences I'd built. They were strong, but they were designed to keep things out, not to keep someone in who was already plotting to burn the house down from the inside. He was being too nice. And in my experience, when a man like Ian starts being nice for no reason, it's because he's already won. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving felt like a slow-motion car crash. Ian didn't bring up the deed again, but he didn't have to. The air in the house had changed. It wasn't the cold silence from before, it was something worse. It was a staged, performative kindness. Ian started inviting Maya over almost every night. They would sit at the kitchen island, the one I'd built from reclaimed barn wood, and look through design inspiration on their phones. They weren't looking at farm equipment or drainage solutions. They were looking at minimalist light fixtures and $400 throw pillows. "Clara, you really need to let us help you with the aesthetic," Maya said one evening. She was leaning over Ian's shoulder, her hair brushing his arm. I was at the sink, scrubbing the grit of a day's work from my forearms. "The dilapidated rustic look only goes so far. If you want this place to actually be worth something, it needs a professional touch. The farm is worth $112,500 more than it was 3 years ago because the roof doesn't leak and the fences don't fall over," I said. I didn't turn around. "See," Ian said to Maya, his voice loud enough for me to hear. "Obsessed with the dirt, she can't see the forest for the trees." They both laughed. It was a sharp, private sound that excluded me in my own home. I realized then that Maya wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was a consultant in a business I hadn't agreed to start. The harm started spreading through the rest of the family like a leak in a basement. My Aunt Susan, Maya's mother, called me a few days later. Susan had always been the one I turned to after my mother passed, but her tone was different now. "Clara, honey, Ian called me," Susan said. "He sounds really worried about you. He says you're working yourself into the ground and refusing to let anyone help with the financial side of things. He's just trying to secure your future, sweetie. Don't be so stubborn that you push away the only person looking out for you." "Ian is looking out for Ian, Aunt Susan," I said. "That's unfair," she snapped. "The poor man has spent 3 years living in the middle of nowhere, supporting your dream. The least you could do is show him some security. Maya says he's been so patient with your moods." I felt the blood drain from my face. My own family was being briefed against me. Ian was laying the groundwork, painting a picture of a husband who was a saintly provider and a wife who was a volatile, ungrateful workaholic. He was winning the social war before I even knew we were fighting one. The cost wasn't just emotional anymore. It was becoming a threat to my reputation in the town. At the local feed store, the owner asked me if I was really planning on selling the back 40 for condos. "Where did you hear that?" I asked. "Your husband was in here last week," the owner said, avoiding my eyes. "Mentioned he was looking at some local real estate agents who specialize in commercial development. Said you were looking to downsize the labor." I walked out of the store with my heart hammering against my ribs. Ian was shopping for my replacement while I was still paying the bills. He was benefiting from the brand of the farm, using the status I'd built with my sweat to charm investors and influence my family, while I was being sidelined as the difficult one. The pressure was building. Everywhere I looked, I saw Maya and Ian together. They were at the dining table, on the porch, in the garden. They were always whispering, always looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. Maya started making jokes about my appearance at Sunday dinners. "Clara, I found this great exfoliating scrub for your hands. It's for, people who do manual labor. It might help you look like a woman again instead of a field hand." Ian would chuckle and squeeze her hand. "She's just trying to help, Clara. Don't be sensitive." I wasn't being sensitive. I was being erased. The final straw came a week before Thanksgiving. I was walking past the guest room, the room Ian had claimed as his office, when I saw his duffel bag sitting on the bed. It wasn't the small gym bag he usually carried. It was a large, heavy-duty traveler's bag, and it was half-packed. I stepped into the room. On the nightstand was a folder. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Inside were printouts from a local law firm. The heading read, Marital Property and Commingled Assets in Agricultural Estates. There were handwritten notes in the margins. It was Ian's handwriting. Focus on the joint effort of the restoration, one note said. Another was scrawled next to a paragraph about forced sales. 84 acres equals $1, 2M share equals $600. He wasn't just planning to leave. He was planning to take half of the land my grandfather had spent 50 years protecting. He was calculating the value of my blood and my savings and trying to figure out how to put it in his pocket. I heard footsteps in the hall and stepped back just as Ian entered. He looked at me, then at the bag, then back at me. He didn't look guilty, he looked annoyed. "I'm going to the city for a couple of days," he said flatly. "Gym trip, some networking, I'll be back for the big dinner." "That's a big bag for a gym trip, Ian," I said. He walked over and zipped the bag shut with a violent tug. "I have a lot of gear, Clara. Don't start with the interrogation. I told you I'm trying to make things work for us. Just focus on the turkey and let me handle the business." He picked up the bag and walked past me, his shoulder hitting mine. He didn't apologize. I stood in the guest room, the smell of his cologne still hanging in the air, and realized I was being hunted in my own house. He was waiting for Thanksgiving. He was waiting for the whole family to be there to witness his rightful claim. I went out to the barn and sat in the dark. I didn't cry. I just looked at my hands, the scarred, rough hands Maya mocked. I'd built those fences to keep things safe. But the predator was already inside, and he had a duffel bag and a plan. I needed a way out, but more than that, I needed to know exactly how deep this went. Because a man doesn't pack a bag like that unless he knows exactly where he's going next. And I had a feeling he wasn't going to the city alone. The betrayal didn't stay confined to the four walls of the farmhouse. It started to leak into the town, turning my private life into a public transaction. A few days after Ian left for his gym trip, I was at the local hardware store picking up more cold weather sealant for the barn windows. The clerk, a man named Miller who had known my grandfather for 40 years, didn't meet my eyes when he rang me up. "Heard you're looking at the old Miller place over on the bypass, Clara," he said, staring at the register screen. I paused, my hand on the heavy bag of sealant. "The bypass, that's 30 miles from here. Why would I be looking at a house there?" Miller shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Your husband was in here with your cousin Maya last week. They were talking about downsizing to something more manageable. Said the farm was getting to be too much of a liability for you. He was asking about contractors who do quick flips for agricultural land." I felt a cold prickle of sweat down my spine. Ian wasn't just planning a divorce, he was actively marketing my home as a quick flip. He was treating my 84 acres of heritage like a used car he was trying to trade in for a newer model. When I got home, I didn't go inside. I went straight to Ian's truck. He'd left it behind, taking Maya's car for their trip. I knew it was a violation, but the rules of our marriage had been set on fire weeks ago. I searched the center console and found exactly what I was afraid of. It was a folder from a high-end real estate agency. Inside were 3 listings for modern, glassy condos in the city and a small, sterile suburban house near the bypass. Each listing was circled in red ink. But the part that made my stomach turn was the sticky note attached to the suburban house. It was Maya's handwriting. "This one is perfect for the transition. Close to the highway, easy to maintain. We can move the rest of the equity into the city unit once the sale clears." They had already picked out their new life. They were shopping for furniture with the money they planned to carve out of my ribs. I looked at the appraisal report tucked behind the listings. The farm had been valued at $1.2 million. Ian had highlighted the section regarding marital contribution. He was building a case that his brand management and social media presence had created the value, not my $112,500 or the years I'd spent in the mud. He was trying to turn my labor into his commission. That afternoon, Maya posted a photo on her social media. It was a picture of a sunset over a generic city skyline. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to let go of the old to make room for the beautiful. New beginnings are coming faster than I thought. Freedom, new chapter." The comments were full of our mutual friends and family members sending heart emojis. My Aunt Susan commented, "You deserve the best, honey. So glad you're finding your path." Nobody was looking at me. I was the difficult wife holding back the visionary husband. I was the obsessed farmer who didn't understand that land was just a number on a spreadsheet. I realized then that this wasn't just about a broken marriage. This was a coordinated takeover. Ian was the face, Maya was the partner, and my own family was the cheering section. They were waiting for Thanksgiving because that's when the official announcement was going to happen. Ian wanted the audience. He wanted to be the one to break the news so he could control the narrative of why the sad, overworked Clara just couldn't keep the farm going anymore. He was going to use the holiday to humiliate me into a settlement. He thought that if he did it in front of everyone, I'd be too ashamed to fight back. He thought I'd just want the noise to stop. The dread was a physical weight in my chest. I looked out at the north pasture. The fences were standing tall, marking the boundaries of what was mine. But the law is a different kind of fence. If Ian could prove he'd contributed significantly to the property's value, he could force a sale. He could make me auction off my grandfather's legacy just to pay him for the privilege of betraying me. The story was getting bigger than I could handle alone. It was moving into the realm of banks, lawyers, and public reputation. I was being outmaneuvered by a man who had never even learned how to prime a pump, but who knew exactly how to manipulate a headline. I went into the barn and sat on a hay bale. My hands were shaking. I had the land, but he had the plan. I had the truth, but he had the audience. I looked at the old iPad I'd left on the workbench, the one we used for inventory and weather tracking. It was dead. I plugged it in, staring at the dark screen, wondering if there was anything left of the life I thought I was building. I was at my breaking point. I was ready to give up, to just let them have their equity if it meant I could have some peace. But then I remembered the fence posts. I remembered the vibration of the post hole digger hitting the rock. I hadn't spent $112,500 and 3 years of my life to become a footnote in Ian and Maya's new beginning. I wasn't going to let them move me into a trailer park while they sat in a glass condo bought with Vance dirt. The spillover was complete. My marriage was dead, my family was compromised, and my farm was under siege. I needed something that couldn't be argued away by a social media post or a sympathetic aunt. I needed the kind of truth that doesn't care about brand management. I just didn't know yet that the truth was already waiting for me in the barn. The clarity didn't come from a dramatic confrontation or a private investigator. It came from Elias, the local fencing contractor who had been my only real ally during the long months of restoration. Elias was a man of few words and permanent tan lines, someone who respected the land as much as I did. He showed up at the barn on the Monday before Thanksgiving to drop off the final invoices for the south pasture gates. I was clearing out a clogged drainage pipe, my arms slick with cold mud. Elias leaned against his truck, watching me work for a moment before he spoke. "Ian's still in the city?" he asked. "Supposed to be back tonight. I said, wiping my forehead with the back of a relatively clean hand. Why? Elias reached into the cab of his truck and pulled out an old iPad. I recognized it immediately. It was the one Ian used for his brand photography and social media. He must have left it charging in the barn office weeks ago. Found this in the tack room when I was finishing the latch on the side door, Elias said, walking over. The battery was dead, so I plugged it in at my shop to see if it was yours. Notifications started popping up, Clara, a lot of them. He didn't hand it to me right away. He held it with a kind of grim hesitation. I'm not one for gossip, and I don't like sticking my nose in marital business. But I've watched you bleed for this dirt for 3 years while he stood on the porch. You really need to read these. He set the iPad on a clean burlap sack on the workbench and walked back to his truck. Invoices are on the seat. I'll see myself out. I stood there for a long time, the mud drying on my skin. The iPad sat there, a small glowing rectangle in the dim light of the barn. I finally reached out and swiped the screen. Ian had never been good with security. He used the same 4-digit code for everything. 0. The messaging app was open. The most recent thread was with Maya. I sat down on the workbench, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't have to scroll far to find the first undeniable cost of my trust. Maya. He said the appraisal came back at 1.2. If we play the joint effort angle, the lawyer thinks we can squeeze $500K out of the settlement. She won't be able to pay it without selling the North acreage. Ian, she'll fight it. You know how she is about Grandpa's legacy. She'd rather live in a tent than sell a foot of this place. Maya, then let her. We take the cash and the condo. My mom is already telling the family she's losing her mind from the stress. By Thanksgiving, they'll be begging you to take over just to save her from herself. Ian, I'm tired of the smell of manure, Maya. I want the city. I want us. Just one more week of playing the supportive husband and we're home free. Maya, I love you. Don't forget to pack the silver drive with the renovation logs you fabricated. We need that paper trail. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean my head between my knees. It wasn't just an affair. It was a heist. They weren't just waiting for the marriage to end. They were actively engineering a situation where I would be forced to dismantle my own inheritance to pay for their new beginning. The messages went back months. They discussed the investors who were actually just friends of Ian's helping him create a fake paper trail of business development. They laughed about the exfoliating scrub Maya gave me, calling it a pity gift for the plow mule. But the most damning part was the timeline. They had planned the Thanksgiving ambush down to the minute. Ian was going to announce the divorce after the main course, citing my mental instability and financial recklessness as the reasons he had to leave and protect his rightful share of the farm's value. Elias hadn't just given me an iPad. He'd given me the map of the minefield. For the first time in 3 years, the fog of exhaustion lifted. I wasn't just a tired farmer anymore. I was a woman who knew exactly where the knives were hidden. The support Elias provided didn't give me an instant victory. It didn't fix the hole in my heart or the betrayal of my cousin. But it gave me something better, clarity. I saw Ian and Maya for exactly what they were, parasites who had mistaken my silence for weakness. I walked to the house, the iPad tucked under my arm. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went to my desk and opened the safe where I kept the original deed and the receipts for every single dollar of the $112,500 I'd spent. Ian thought he was a big-picture guy. He thought he could use social media and family gossip to rewrite the history of this land. But he had forgotten one thing about people who work the soil. We know how to dig. And we know how to wait for the right season to harvest. I looked at the silver flash drive Ian had mentioned in the messages. It was sitting right there in his desk drawer labeled Farm Progress. I plugged it in. It was full of staged photos and fake logs of consultation hours he claimed to have put into the restoration. He was building a lie bite by bite. I took his silver drive and replaced it with a brand new one I'd bought for backup files months ago. It looked identical. On my new silver drive, I didn't put fake logs. I put the 14 most explicit messages from the iPad. I put the screenshots of Maya's plan to squeeze the equity. I put the real invoices Elias had just given me, which were all addressed to me and paid from my personal account. The leverage was starting to take shape. It wasn't a weapon yet, but it was the ammunition. I heard Ian's truck pull into the gravel driveway. I heard the door slam and his cheerful whistle as he walked toward the porch. "Clara, I'm home," he called out. "Wait until you see the wine I brought for Thursday. Only the best for the Vance estate." I closed the drawer and stood up. I smoothed my hair and checked my face in the mirror. I looked like the same plow mule he'd been mocking for months. "Welcome back, Ian," I said, walking into the hallway. "I'm sure it'll be a dinner none of us ever forget." The silver flash drive felt heavy in my pocket, even though it weighed almost nothing. It was the only thing I had that Ian couldn't manipulate with a filtered photo or a scripted lie. I waited until Ian went to the shower that night before I sat down with the iPad again. I needed to be sure. I needed to see the how and the when of their plan so I didn't trip over my own feet when the time came. I opened the messages and scrolled back to 3 weeks ago, the week Ian had started being nice again. "Ian, she's finally stopped fighting the idea of me helping with the finances. I told her I just want to protect her. She's so tired she actually looked relieved. It's pathetic, honestly. Maya, don't feel bad. She's a workhorse, Ian. She doesn't know how to enjoy the money anyway. We're doing her a favor by taking the stress of the back acreage off her hands. My mom says the family is already on board with you taking over the management side. Ian, the lawyer says if I can show I've been the primary operator for the last year, the sweat equity argument she'll try to use won't hold up. That's why I'm doing the social media push. Every post is evidence of my involvement. I'm the face of the Vance farm now." I felt a cold, hard knot tie itself in my stomach. He wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing my identity as the steward of this land. He was trying to prove in a court of law that my calloused hands were just the manual labor, and his Instagram posts were the executive management that created the value. That was his mistake. He thought management was just looking good in a linen shirt. He didn't realize that being an operator means keeping records. I went to my office and pulled out my real journals. For 3 years, I had kept a physical log of every fence post, every drainage tile, every gallon of diesel, and every hour spent on the tractor. I had the original bank statements showing the $112,500 coming out of my inheritance account, an account Ian's name had never touched. I had the invoices from Elias, all made out to Clara Vance. I spent the next 4 hours at the scanner. I digitized every single receipt. I scanned the handwritten notes from the day the North Pasture flooded, and I stayed up for 36 hours straight digging a trench by hand while Ian was at a marketing seminar in the city. I created a folder on the silver flash drive. I named it The Truth. Inside that folder, I put the 14 most incriminating messages from the iPad. I included the one where Maya laughed about me looking like a plow mule. I included the one where Ian admitted he was tired of the smell of manure and just wanted the cash for a city condo. I included the screenshots of the real estate listings for the houses they'd already picked out together. Then, I added a second folder, the ledger. This one contained the scan of the $112,500 wire transfer, the property deed showing sole inheritance, and the 3 years of labor logs. I also included a copy of the premarital agreement Ian had signed, the one he thought was unenforceable because he'd contributed so much to the restoration. The leverage was complete. It was a digital map of a betrayal that left no room for misunderstandings. I heard the shower stop. I heard Ian whistling again. He was so confident. He thought he was the predator and I was the prey. He thought he was playing a high-stakes game of chess, and he didn't realize I'd already taken his queen before the match even started. I looked at the silver drive one last time before I tucked it into the hidden compartment of my jewelry box. Ian had spent months building a house of cards. He'd used my family, my cousin, and my own reputation to prop it up. He was planning to blow it all down on Thanksgiving, right in front of everyone I loved, to make sure I was too broken to fight for what was mine. But a house of cards doesn't stand up to the truth, and a man who hates the smell of manure shouldn't try to steal a farm from the woman who knows where all the bodies are buried. That night, I lay in bed next to him, staring at the ceiling. He reached out and patted my hand, his touch light and condescending. "Everything is going to change soon, Clara," he whispered, his voice full of a fake, gentle pity. "You won't have to work so hard anymore. I'm going to take care of everything." "I know you are, Ian," I said. I didn't roll away. I didn't pull my hand back. I just lay there in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the windows of the house I had saved. I felt a strange, quiet power. The kind you only get when you stop being afraid of the ending and start looking forward to the beginning. The leverage was ready. The countdown had started. Ian thought he was going to walk away with $600,000 and a new life with my cousin. He had no idea that by the time dessert was served on Thursday, he'd be lucky if he walked away with the clothes in his duffel bag. I closed my eyes and pictured the fences. They were strong. They were high. And for the first time in 3 years, I knew exactly who they were meant to keep out. That was the turning point. I stopped being a victim of his plan and started being the architect of my own. I wasn't just defending the farm anymore. I was taking it back. The countdown began on Tuesday morning. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., not because I had work to do, but because the silence in the house was vibrating. Ian was still asleep, his breathing heavy and rhythmic. I looked at him in the gray light and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the cold, clinical focus of a person preparing for a harvest. I spent the morning in the kitchen. I made the cranberry sauce from scratch. I prepped the stuffing. I moved with a deliberate, quiet grace. If Ian was watching, and he was from the doorway with his coffee, he saw exactly what he expected to see. A woman who was nesting, a woman who was predictable. "You're really going all out this year, Clara," he said, leaning against the frame. "It's been a big year for the farm," I replied, not looking up from the celery I was dicing. "I want everyone to see how far we've come." "They will," he said. The edge in his voice was sharp. "Believe me, they will." That was his emotional move. He was savoring the secret. He thought he was the only one with a surprise under his napkin. On Wednesday, I made my logistical move. I drove into town and met with Elias at the diner. I didn't tell him the whole plan, but I handed him a sealed envelope. "If I don't call you by 9:00 p.m. tomorrow night," I said, "take this to the sheriff. It's a copy of everything on the drive, plus a statement about the unauthorized access to my financial accounts." Elias took the envelope and tucked it into his heavy work jacket. "You sure about this, Clara? You could just kick him out today. You don't owe these people a show." "It's not about the show," I said. "It's about the witness. If I do it quietly, he'll spend the next 10 years telling the family I'm the villain. I need them to see the truth fall out of his own mouth." Elias nodded once. "I'll be by the phone." My risk move happened that evening. Ian was in the living room nursing a bourbon when I sat down across from him. I didn't have the flash drive on me. It was taped to the underside of the lawnmower seat in the barn. "Ian," I said, keeping my voice soft. "I was thinking about what you said, about the partnership, about the future." He perked up, his eyes gleaming with the prospect of an early surrender. "Yeah, I want you to know that I appreciate everything you've contributed," I said. The lie tasted like copper in my mouth. "I know I haven't always said it, but tomorrow, in front of the family, I want to make sure everyone knows where we stand." He actually reached out and patted my knee. "That's all I ever wanted, Clara, recognition. I'm glad you're finally seeing sense." He thought I was prepping a public thank you speech. He thought I was going to hand him the keys to the kingdom in front of my Aunt Susan and the rest of the Vance clan. I let him believe it. I let him go to bed feeling like the king of the mountain. Thursday morning was a blur of steam and social masks. By 2:00 p.m., the gravel driveway was full of cars. My Aunt Susan arrived first, trailing Maya, who was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater that looked like it had never been within a mile of a barn. "Clara, you look tired," Maya said, kissing my cheek. Her eyes immediately darted to Ian, who was standing behind me. A look passed between them, quick, hungry, and triumphant. "It's a lot of work, Maya," I said, "but it's worth it to keep what's mine." I saw her flinch just a fraction, but then she smiled her pageant smile. "Of course, honey. Family first." 12 of us sat down in the dining room. The table was beautiful. I'd used the good china, the silver that belonged to my grandmother, and the linen napkins I'd bleached by hand. The turkey was perfect. The wine Ian had brought was flowing. Ian sat at the head of the table. He just naturally gravitated there as if the chair had his name on it. He was charming the room, telling stories about the struggles of the renovation, making it sound like he'd personally wrestled every fence post into the ground. "And you wouldn't believe the drainage issues on the north slope," he said, gesturing with his wine glass. "I had to spend weeks researching agricultural engineering just to make sure the foundation stayed dry." "Right, Clara." I took a slow sip of water. "You certainly spent a lot of time on your tablet, Ian." A few people chuckled. Ian's smile didn't reach his eyes. Maya was sitting next to her mother, Aunt Susan. She kept checking her phone under the table. I knew what she was waiting for. She was waiting for the moment the dinner ended and the business began. The atmosphere was thick with a double meaning I was the only one fully seeing. To my family, it was a warm holiday meal. To Ian and Maya, it was a victory lap. To me, it was a countdown. As I cleared the dinner plates, Ian stood up. He didn't wait for the pie. He cleared his throat and the room went quiet. This was the threshold. This was the moment he had rehearsed in the city. "Before we move on to dessert," Ian said, his voice dropping into that somber, rehearsed tone I'd heard in the kitchen weeks ago, "I have something I need to say. It's not easy, but for the sake of the farm and for Clara's well-being, it's necessary." I saw Maya sit up straighter. I saw Aunt Susan look at me with a pained, pitying expression. I reached into my pocket and felt the cool, hard edge of the silver flash drive. I'd brought it in from the barn 10 minutes ago. "Go ahead, Ian," I said, leaning against the sideboard. "The floor is yours." He looked at me, a flicker of confusion crossing his face at how calm I was. But his ego was too big to stop the train. He adjusted his collar, looked at my family, and began the speech that was supposed to end my life on this land. He had no idea that I wasn't the one standing in the trap. Ian's voice was steady, practiced, and dripping with a condescension that made my skin crawl. He stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on the back of his chair as if it were a throne. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about the legacy of the Vance farm," Ian began, looking around the room at my aunts, uncles, and cousins. "And I've realized that being a good husband means making the hard choices that your partner can't make for herself. Clara has worked herself to the bone. We all see it. But the truth is, this property has become a weight she can't carry anymore. Her attachment to the past is blinding her to the reality of the present. Aunt Susan nodded slowly, her face etched with a look of manufactured concern. Maya kept her eyes down, picking at a loose thread on her cashmere sleeve, playing the role of the grieving bystander to perfection. I've consulted with developers and legal experts, Ian continued, his chest puffing out just a fraction. For the health of our marriage and the preservation of our financial future, I've decided to initiate a formal separation. But more than that, I'm filing for a court-ordered partition of this property. The law recognizes the immense value I've added through my management and restoration oversight. It's only fair that I take my half so Clara can finally move into something manageable. A trailer park might sound harsh to some, but it's about living within one's means. It's time for a fresh start. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, then the sharp crack of glass hitting the floor. Aunt Susan had dropped her wine glass. Red liquid bloomed across the white oak floorboards I had spent 80 hours sanding. She didn't even look at the mess. She was staring at Ian, her mouth slightly open. "Half, Ian?" my Uncle David asked, his voice low. "This is Vance land. You've been here 3 years." 3 years of executive leadership, Ian snapped, his charm slipping for a second. I've turned a decaying relic into a $1 million asset. The Vance name didn't do that. My brand did. And since Clara refuses to acknowledge my stake, the courts will. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't even stand up. I just reached into my pocket, pulled out the silver flash drive, and tossed it onto the center of the table. Lit across the wood, clicking against the base of a crystal candlestick. "What is that?" Ian asked, his eyes darting to the drive and then back to me. "That's your executive leadership, Ian," I said. My voice was quieter than his, but it filled the room. "Since you're so fond of public announcements, I figured we should look at the internal memos." Ian laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Clara, don't be dramatic. A flash drive proves nothing. If those are more photos of fence posts, nobody cares." "It's not photos," I said. I looked at Maya. She had gone very, very still. Her face was the color of her cream sweater. "Maya, do you want to tell them what's on there? Or should I read the message from November 12th? Maya's head snapped up. I don't know what you're talking about." "Message number 4, I said, looking directly at her. "The one where you asked Ian what color the bedroom in the city condo should be. The condo you both planned to buy with the $600,000 you were going to squeeze out of my grandfather's north pasture." Aunt Susan looked at her daughter. "Maya, she's lying," Ian shouted, stepping toward me. "She's desperate and she's making things up because she knows she's losing." "The drive contains 14 messages, Ian," I said, standing up slowly. I didn't back away. "It contains the real estate listings for the houses you and Maya visited while I was digging out the drainage pipes. It contains your notes on how to fabricate logs to prove you were the primary operator. And it contains the wire transfer records from my personal inheritance account, the $112,500 that paid for every single thing you're currently claiming as your contribution." "You hacked my tablet," Ian hissed, his face contorting. "That's illegal. You can't use that." "I didn't hack anything," I said. "You left it in the barn. Elia's found it." "And as for the law, I've already spoken to a lawyer, Ian. Premeditated financial fraud and conspiracy to commit asset theft don't look great in a partition hearing, especially when the partnership involves my own cousin." The room exploded. Aunt Susan stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. She grabbed Maya's arm, her face red with a mixture of fury and deep, cutting shame. "Is this true? Maya, look at me." Maya burst into tears, but they weren't the tears of someone who was sorry. They were the jagged, ugly sobs of someone who had been caught. He said he loved me. He said she was ruining his life. I was ruining his life, I asked, looking at Ian. He was backed against the sideboard now, his polished boots stepping in the wine Aunt Susan had spilled. By paying your bills, by letting you live here for free while I bled into the dirt, by trusting you. Ian looked around the room, searching for a single friendly face. He didn't find one. My uncles were standing up now, their expressions hard. These were men who lived by the code of the land, and in their world there was no sin greater than trying to steal a person's heritage from under their own roof. "Get out," Uncle David said. It wasn't a shout, it was a command. "You can't kick me out," Ian yelled, his voice cracking. "I have rights, I'm her husband." "You're a trespasser," I said. "I've already changed the gate codes. Elia's is waiting at the end of the driveway." "Your duffel bag is already in the bed of your truck. I packed it this morning while you were enjoying your coffee." Ian looked at the silver drive on the table, then at me. The smug, visionary leader was gone. In his place was a small, panicked man who realized his house of cards had just been hit by a hurricane. "Clara, let's just talk," he pleaded, his voice dropping into a manipulative whine. "We can work this out. I was just stressed. I didn't mean any of it." "You meant every word," I said. "You meant it when you called me a plow mule. You meant it when you told Maya you were tired of the smell of manure. So I'm doing you a favor, Ian. I'm letting you go back to the city. But you're going back exactly the way you arrived, with nothing." Aunt Susan turned to Maya, her voice trembling. "Pack your things, you're leaving with me. And don't you ever show your face on this farm again." Maya tried to reach for her mother's hand, but Susan pulled away as if she'd been burned. The silence that followed was heavier than the one Ian had started with. It was the silence of a family bond snapping in half. Ian didn't move for a long minute. He looked at the dinner he hadn't finished, the expensive wine in his glass, and the 84 acres visible through the window, land he would never touch again. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out the kitchen door. We heard his truck engine turn over. We heard the gravel spray as he sped down the driveway toward the gate where Elia's was waiting to make sure he didn't stop. Maya followed a few minutes later, hunched over, her face hidden by her hair. Aunt Susan didn't look at me as she walked out behind her daughter. She just kept her head down, her shoulders shaking. The 10 of us who remained sat in the dining room. The turkey was cold. The wine was bitter. "I'm sorry about the floor, Clara," my Uncle David said, picking up a napkin to blot the wine. "It's okay, Uncle David," I said, sitting back down in my chair. "It's just wood, I know how to fix it." I picked up the silver flash drive. It was light, cool, and final. I had spent 3 years building fences to protect this land from the outside world. I hadn't realized that the most important gate I ever closed was the one in my own kitchen. The Thanksgiving ambush was over. But the farm was still standing. And for the first time since my grandfather died, it felt like it actually belonged to me. The aftermath of that Thanksgiving wasn't an explosion. It was a long, slow receding of the tide. By the time the sun came up on Friday morning, the farm felt twice as big and 10 times quieter. Ian's legal threats evaporated as soon as my lawyer forwarded a summary of the flash drive's contents to his representation. There is no equitable distribution for a spouse caught on record plotting financial fraud and property theft with a family member. He signed the divorce papers in a strip mall office 3 weeks later. He didn't look at me once. He didn't ask for a single piece of furniture. He just wanted the non-disclosure agreement signed so the screenshots wouldn't make it to his professional network in the city. I signed it. I didn't need to ruin him further. He'd already done the work for me. Maya didn't fare as well. My Aunt Susan, a woman whose pride was tied to the Vance reputation, essentially exiled her own daughter. Maya is living in an apartment 2 hours away now, working a retail job she once would have mocked. We haven't spoken. I don't think we ever will. Some betrayals are like salt in the soil, nothing grows there ever again. The $112,500 I spent is gone, but the value it created is mine. The North Pasture is flourishing, and I've transitioned the land into a sustainable conservancy. No vineyards, no glamping, just the dirt and the cattle the way my grandfather intended. I spend my evenings on the porch now. My hands are still rough, and my shoulders still ache when the weather turns cold. But when I look out at the black fences cutting through the twilight, I don't see a burden. I see a boundary. I see the exact line where the lies had to stop. Last week, I stood at the edge of the South Pasture and ran my hand along a fence post I'd set myself. The wood was silvering in the sun, solid and deep in the earth. It didn't matter who took the credit or who took the photos. The post was still holding the wire. The land was still whole. I think about that duffel bag sometimes. I think about how close I came to letting a man who hated the smell of my life take it away from me. I realize that loyalty isn't about how much you're willing to suffer. It's about knowing what's worth defending. I'm Clara Vance. I'm 31 years old. And I've finally learned that the most important thing you can grow on a farm is a spine. What would you have done the moment you saw that half-packed duffel bag in the guest room? Would you have confronted him then, or waited for the truth to come out on its own terms? Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a relative try to claim credit for the work you did with your own two hands. If you want to hear more stories about protecting what's yours, check out this other story about a partner who tried to secretly sell a house behind their spouse's back. And if you connected with this journey of standing your ground, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know.